In 2016, one of the most popular games ever was released.
Lynx is the last man on point. Can he get there with the Santa comes down? He swims onto Neptuno.
But this story isn't about Overwatch. It's a story about the underdog, about going toe-to-toe with a giant like David and Goliath. But unlike David, the underdog in this story suffers defeat. But even though they're defeated, it was not the end. And like a phoenix in the ashes, they were reborn from their defeat. This is a story about Gigantic. Okay, so sure, everyone remembers Team Fortress 2, but Overwatch was the game that really propelled that genre into its cultural recognizability. And while the hero shooter genre was experiencing this resurgence of players, in the background, Dota 2 and League of Legends were dominating the esports scene. The prize pool for the League World Championship in 2016 alone was $5 million. And the International 2016 for Dota 2 had a crowd-funded prize pool totaling a whopping $20 million. 2016 was a great year for hero shooters and MOBAs alike, and less than a year later, a new title would emerge to try and bridge the divide between the two genres. Okay, so we've set up the context for the background that this game released into. Gigantic was released back on July 20th, 2017, a full 14 months after its two direct competitors, Battleborn and Overwatch. Apparently, this was the time when everybody all decided at the same time to start making their own hero shooter game.
You got a fucking problem, bro?
This game was launching in the wake of these industry titans like Overwatch, League of Legends, Dota, and it even had smaller competitors like Battleborn, which may or may not be in a very similar boat to Gigantic, and Paragon, which is a MOBA that is in the exact same boat as Gigantic. But from the very moment of this game's release, the cards were stacked against it.
The game was rigged from the start.
But the reception of all of these games was positive, generally speaking. Gigantic was no different. This was a game that was well received by the audience. People enjoyed playing it. They came back. The fans who were there, they were dedicated. They were loyal to the end. The user reviews were higher than the game journal's reviews, but we all know that industry is a joke anyway. Their opinions don't really matter, so... But people generally enjoyed playing Gigantic. So let's talk about the game. I'm too lazy to write this part out myself, so I'm just gonna plagiarize from VG247 from an article written by Mike Williams of US Gamer. The game is built around a mechanic that gave it the name Gigantic. The large guardians that rest at either end of every playing field. Two teams of 5 players compete to hold the various points around the map and kill the opposing force. Holding points nets your team energy. Once you achieve a certain energy threshold, your guardian wakes up, travels across the map to the other team's guardian, and fights them. This massive fight opens up a weak point on the enemy guardian that your team has to exploit. Do enough damage, and you cause a wound. Do that 3 times, and you win. By the way, Mike Williams, phenomenal games journalist. This article that I stole from, paraphrased, was well thought out, well written. It was an overall good article, except for one thing that I kind of disagreed with near the end, but whatever.
That's my opinion!
But all his articles are very interesting topics, and he wrote a Marvel Avengers review and highlighted basically every shortcoming of the game and how and why exactly it ruins the game. What do you know? A gaming journalist who actually does his job, plays the game, and gives an honest review and retrospective. And when I was researching for this video, I was actively seeking out VG 24/7 articles because of this guy. So great job, Mike Williams. I don't even know if you're still working in the industry, but keep it up. Actually, just check that right now. He is still in the industry. His last review was January, so he's still got a job. Okay, let's get back to talking about the game. So Gigantic is a hero shooter at its core, but it plays like a MOBA. It's definitely a much faster pace than the typical MOBA, much more on par with games like Overwatch, but you can tell just by glancing at the gameplay. You can tell just by looking at the map overlay that the game was very obviously inspired by MOBAs, heavily. It draws elements of the MOBA genre into its core gameplay loop. Things like character leveling, the lane layout of the maps, and the resource pools are all indicative of traditional MOBAs, yet they aren't present in hero shooters. It's such an interesting fusion too, because Gigantic manages to take these familiar and inspired game mechanics and rearrange them in such a way that it feels like a completely new experience. This does not always resonate well with some people, which might actually contribute to part of the downfall of this game. And this is where I disagreed heavily with Mike Williams' article. He ended up only scoring the game a 3.5 out of 5, despite having many very great things to say about the game. He cited his reasoning as being that the game lacked variety, which is understandable, but he said that it was because there was only one mode on 3 maps. Mike wanted to see modes like Domination, Horde, or Escort, but the only mode that Gigantic offered was the Gigantic mode. Which was the 2 gigantic guardians getting up and fighting each other. To me, however, this doesn't seem like much of a problem at all. Considering how much inspiration this game took from MOBAs, Motiga probably thought it didn't need other game modes to justify playing the game. People are perfectly content playing the same 3-lane jousting jungle fest that epitomizes the MOBA genre. Most of the variety in the genre of games comes from the extensive roster of characters to pick from. So the lack of variety makes perfect sense to me, especially if they're trying to make the game more like MOBAs and less like Overwatch. Maybe they wanted to make a game that really bridged the divide between these two genres and highlighted the things that made them similar. Unfortunately, all good things must come to an end. But even more, unfortunately for Gigantic and developer Motiga, that end came only 1 year after its release. On January 31st, 2018, Motiga dropped a blog post to announce that the January update would be the final update that Gigantic would receive, and the servers would officially shut down on July 31st of that same year. I had to dig through the Wayback Machine to find the original blog post that Motiga put out when they made the decision to discontinue this game's service. It is with heavy hearts that we announce the January update is the final content update for Gigantic, and the game servers will be discontinued on July 31st, 2018. The journey over these last few years was met with outstanding support from our players, and we are all very proud of the incredible experience Gigantic is today. The team wants to give a big shout out to our awesome community, both those who have been with us since the beginning as well as those who just picked up the game recently. We want to extend our sincere gratitude to everyone who gave Gigantic a chance. Discontinuing Gigantic was not an easy decision. The game is a unique and exciting experience that captured many hearts and minds. Unfortunately, it did not resonate with as many people as we'd hoped. Over the last several months, the teams at Motiga and Perfect World looked into viable options to sustain Gigantic. However, the current state of the game has restricted options for further progress and relevant content updates, and delivering basic features while also fixing long-standing issues was more complicated than expected. Despite our best efforts, we were unable to find an impactful solution that would help Gigantic break through in a crowded market. Crowded is an understatement. They were going up against one of the titans of hero shooters, titans of the gaming world at large. Overwatch is nothing to turn your nose up at, and to put a game out that is a competitor to it is difficult on its own, but they weren't even just competing with Overwatch. Gigantic is as much of a MOBA as it is a hero shooter. They were competing with League of Legends and Dota 2. The cards were just completely stacked against it. Gigantic remains a labor of love to the Motiga and Perfect World teams who worked on the game. It pains us to let it go, and we cannot thank everyone enough who saw something special in Gigantic and its vision. We hope you continue to enjoy Gigantic until July 31st, while the official servers remain online. One last gigantic thank you to our amazing community, and while the sales are up, we'll see you on the airship. It's such a sad sight to see, because you can tell just by reading this that the developers loved this game and wanted to keep it alive. It breaks my heart reading it, because you can tell that in writing it, they were writing through a broken heart as well. And in one last show of love for the community, they offered all the heroes in Gigantic for free to anyone who wanted to continue playing the game until the servers shut down. But this wasn't the end of the Gigantic saga quite yet. In 2021, Perfect World Entertainment was bought out by Embracer Group, which also owned Gearbox Software at the time. So Perfect World, the publisher of Gigantic, was rebranded into Gearbox. This sparked a movement in the Gigantic subreddit. The members of this community started an email campaign to try to garner support for Gigantic and convince Gearbox to bring the game back to life. Evidently, it worked. Initially, back in October 2023, Gearbox announced that they would be doing a limited timed event for Gigantic to come back onto the market. For 2 days only, you could play the old game, and people were excited. In the PC Gamer article that detailed this event, it stated that there was no indication that the email campaign had any direct influence on the comeback of Gigantic. I think that's a ridiculous statement. Maybe it's true.
Maybe. Maybe not. Maybe fuck yourself.
But that was back in October of last year. Now, the game is officially returning full service. But Gigantic isn't the only game that has died off, only to be revived in the future. I'm talking specifically about the MOBA Predecessor. Recently, Predecessor was put on the market as a free-to-play early access beta, which basically just means that they're releasing the game to the public so that they can sell skins and generate revenue on an unfinished product. That's alright, because the game is pretty polished for being an early access beta. But back in 2016, Epic Games released the MOBA Paragon, the Overprime. At the time, this was a free-to-play MOBA, but support was subsequently cut for it only a couple years later, because Epic Games wanted to prioritize more important projects. So flash forward to now, and the game has been revived in the title of Predecessor. The two games are slightly different. Predecessor is much more of a traditional, slower paced MOBA, whereas Paragon was much faster paced, but the assets are all the same. The map layout is different in Predecessor, but it's still effectively a revival of the old title. So one can say Predecessor is the idealistic MOBA Paragon to its predecessor title, Paragon. So wait, Paragon is the predecessor to Predecessor, but Predecessor is much more of a paragon for MOBAs than Paragon was. So even though Paragon was the predecessor, Predecessor now serves as the MOBA Paragon? What is happening? But this seems to be a brand new trend emerging across the gaming landscape. Companies are looking back at games that they released that launched with less success than they would have hoped for at the time, and they are revitalizing them to try and release them to a more, hopefully, receptive audience. And I think this revival of old IPs is such a great idea, especially in the wake of all of the AAA garbage that is being out year in and year out. Maybe these companies are sensing a general displeasure from gamers concerning the general state of the titans of the industry. Maybe they're looking at some of the recent AAA mega flops that have come out and just completely underperformed and thinking, hey, we could provide these hungry gamers with some nourishing content. Recently, my friends and I have been playing a crapload of Predecessor, and we've been having a blast. Until our junglers start stealing our wave clear over and over and over and over. And because of these revivals, hope is being generated in other communities for other games that have died off in similar fashion. The thought is that if those titles got this treatment, then maybe this title can also get the same treatment, and the game can be revived and we can all enjoy it once again. Gigantic was originally developed by Motiga and published by Perfect World Entertainment. But Perfect World was rebranded to Gearbox after Embracer Group, which was formerly more commonly known as THQ Nordic, bought out both Perfect World Entertainment and Gearbox Software in 2021. I hate every word that just came out of my mouth. I don't understand corporations at all. I don't understand why anyone would even want to be a part of this. This is hell. This is what dystopia looks and sounds like. Hello, I'm Editing Luke. In addition to suffering from multiple personality disorder and imposter syndrome, I recently found out that Gearbox no longer exists. As of yesterday, April 8th, Gearbox has been rebranded to Arc Games after they were subsequently bought out by a different company altogether from Embracer. But anyway, Gearbox is the current publisher for Gigantic Rampage Edition, and there is hope that since they revived this game, they might also revive its original competitor, Battleborn, which was originally developed by Gearbox Studios. This was a hero shooter that was also released in 2016, but shut down a few years later. Granted, it wasn't completely shut down until 2021, but it was officially taken off the market for purchase in 2019, so still pretty depressing. Man, 2016 was just a roller coaster of emotions for game developers and players. But if Gearbox is willing to bring back a game like Gigantic, then it makes sense that they might also bring back Battleborn. I mean, the community support for Battleborn is almost even louder than Gigantic was. But both Gigantic and Battleborn were two amazing hero shooters that were just overshadowed by the titan Overwatch. So while it's sad to see that these games had to go, it's nice to see that there's a spark of hope and that it's not completely lost. I mean, we're seeing it right now. It's happening. It's tangibly happening. I never played Paragon, but I'm playing Predecessor now, and I can tell you right now that I am so glad that I didn't have to go through the shutdown of Paragon, because that would have been a sad moment for me. I would have been generally upset. And Gigantic is another game that I never got the chance to play. Man, you're really doing a bang up job giving your honest opinion of a game that you've never played. But even though the servers were completely shut down years ago, I am excited to say that now I may or may not have the chance to play it today. Please put the game on sale so I can afford it, Motiga. I mean Gearbox. Just kidding, it's Arc Games now. I mean, even AAA companies are getting in on this action too. The original Halo 2 servers are being brought back online for the original Xbox after being shut down since 2010. This is a new trend. This is a great win for players who want to go back and experience these old games and experience the multiplayer of these games from their childhood or from their early adulthood. For once, it feels like being a gamer, I'm not getting shafted and price gouged exclusively by all these companies that are putting out all these games. This is a very positive trend just for people in general, from a consumer standpoint, from a gaming standpoint, and it gives hope to a lot of different communities that saw a lot of their favorite games get shut down or discontinued because they weren't as popular as the publishers hoped they would be. But there are still some games that should get shut down and stay shut down forever and never come back ever again. Fingers crossed. But if you've got a favorite game that was shut down in the past and you want to see revived right now, let me know down in the comments what that game is. I don't know how I'm gonna end this yet again.